What's up, everybody? It's Troy Cartwright. Welcome back to another episode of 10-Year Town. Before we get started, a couple favors to ask of you. Number one, if you haven't already, if you could leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it helps us out a ton. And the second thing is we are getting ready to launch a few live events. So if you want to make sure you're aware of those, join the 10-Year Town community at 10yeartown.com. Thanks. Today's guest is the legendary Marv Green. You know Marv from some of the massive songs that he's written, like Amazed by Lonestar, It Just Comes Natural by George Strait, Shotgun Rider by Tim McGraw, Creepin' by Eric Church, and many more. In this episode, we talk about the stories behind some of those songs, his journey along the way, and so much more. So without further ado, here he is, Marv Green. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here, Troy.
I appreciate it. And I always start this thing off with the same question, which is how long have you been in town?
I am into my 31st year.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll hit 32 in March.
Where from? Where'd you come from?
Born in Santa Barbara, California. I lived there until about fourth grade and then moved up to the San Ynez Valley, which is just slightly north of Santa Barbara, a little valley that has become quite the wine valley now. But when I was growing up, it's a little more rural, a little more horse ranchy.
Okay.
I was an active member of the 4-H and the FFA, and
there
also an avid surfer as well. So
wow.
Yeah, I had a horse and a surfboard, classic California.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds incredible. That sounds like a great way to grow up.
Yeah, and I had, if you know that area, you're like, well, how'd you get into country music? But my dad was a country music loving, always, this is how old I am. It was an 8-track, and it was Buck Owens and Hag and Charlie Pride, Hank Sr., that was always playing. So I was always exposed. Because I was thinking, like, a friend I went to high school with who I was later in a band with, how unattached to country he is and listening to, he's still doing music, but
yeah,
it's just so funny. I can hear, like, the hours and hours of John Lennon that was played in his ears versus the hours and hours of honky tonk that was played in mine.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how it's sort of over time? I go back and listen to the records that I listened to in high school.
Oh yeah,
and
or before that. The first album, I'm quite sure the first album I ever bought, ironically, is Honky Tonk Heroes by Waylon Jennings.
Wow.
You wouldn't think a California kid would have purchased that, but I love that album to this day. It's still one of my favorites to crank up the grill and cook something and listen to Waylon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So when you, what kind of, were you playing in bands and stuff? And then, like, how did you get to Nashville?
Yeah. So started with just the love of song. My brother and I had the little Blue Suitcase record player as well, even before we moved up to the valley. And so we were fans of songs and songwriters before we even knew it. Then artists like John Denver came along, and my brother was first. He got an acoustic guitar, and it morphed pretty quickly by sixth grade into just wanting to sing some of those songs. Mm-hmm. And then maybe by eighth grade, starting to make your own up, Yeah. And then by then playing talent shows. And then by the time I was in high school, we were the default band, I always look at my kids and I was like, don't y'all ever have bands for your high school dances? And they look at me like I'm from Mars. They're like, no. Well, first of all, we always had a dance after every football game.
Really?
And 75% of the time we were the band.
Yeah.
And so that was high school. And then by the time I was a senior, I was already playing in bars with my brother, where you have to leave the premises during your break. And,
yeah,
but playing, a few gigs here and there and weddings and whatnot. So,
yeah.
And then by the time I was in my 20s, it was a lot of, my brother was so good at booking those bowling alley bars and honky tonks that exist from San Luis Obispo and Paso Robles all the way down to Orange County. And he could keep us as busy as as we wanted to be 3 nights a week, you know.
Yeah.
And then my buddies from high school, we tried to figure out Hollywood in a rock pop sense. Unfortunately, this is the late 80s, and I was really, although I love country music, I was really getting influenced by synthesized, just synth-based music, which is ironic because I was a guitar player. So it's kind of a bummer because I wish I would have focused more on the guitar with that band.
Yeah.
Because we had something, you know, at 23 playing the Roxy and those places in Hollywood. That was a big deal for a small town kid.
Yeah.
And then just kept playing with my brother, and until finally we entered, and they have them across the United States, but for us it was the GMC True Value Country Showdown.
Okay.
And we won the Western United States. They flew us to Branson, Missouri, and then we did a show with Kenny Rogers and Doug Stone, and they were like, you should move to Nashville or at least go see it. And I just finally said, okay, I'm going to go check out Nashville. And
Yeah.
I did, and it was good timing. I needed a change. I was playing in the bars and absorbing too much of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
In every way. And so I just needed a change, and Nashville I saw as a town where I could just escape all that and go focus on songwriting, and that's what I did in 1993.
Wow. Was it hard to leave the, I don't know if you had to leave the band or if it fizzled out or?
I did, yeah. So I broke up my high school buddies' band. 25 was a hard age for me. I really self-assessed everything at 25. And then a couple of years after that, I just left my brother's country band and just said, I just got to go do this. And I did, you know.
Yeah.
But it was hard. It was hard to go to Nashville and wait tables. And, you know, I look back because I was doing some diary stuff and just some journaling, and I could tell I was homesick, super homesick, relatively quickly. So I don't know if I was the guy that was going to stay here 2 years, 3 years and wait tables. I don't think that would happen. And I got, you know, right time, right place for me, which I'm scooting ahead. But yeah, waiting tables and answering phones for JCPenney catalog. I was like, what am I doing? I'm not doing music. This doesn't feel right, you know. Yeah.
But, were you able to? I mean, were you still writing songs at that point?
Yeah. Just writing by myself, mostly, which was healthy. It turned out to be healthy. I befriended a guy, Cam King, who had a little setup on the east side, a little recording. He was so good at the B-Bender Telly. Yeah. And he recorded me. He recorded 6 songs that I had recorded here, and part of a couple of them I kind of brought with me, but he recorded these 6 tunes, and about 5 months in, I remembered through my brother's band, there was a DJ we met in California. He said, if you ever get to Nashville, I know someone. And so I recorded these songs, and then I reached out. I said, okay, you said you know someone. And he said, well, my wife's cousin is a guy named Scott Hendricks. And I was like, what? I know who that is, because I was such a fan of producer, songwriter, you know, musicians. And so I knew exactly who Scott was. I said, is there any way you could call and see if he'll listen to my stuff? Yeah. He goes, well, let me reach out to him. And he did. And he goes, man, Scott's producing a bunch of stuff. He said, just leave it at his desk. He told me where to leave it. He said, it might be 2 months, it might be 6 months before you hear from him, but he said, take your music. So I left it on a Friday, and Scott called me the next Monday.
Wow. That's crazy.
And he said, man, I love what you're up to. I want to meet with you. So we met, and then he brought me over to Warner Chappell and started Big Tractor Music.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And that's when Michael Knox landed at Warner. Tim Whipperman was still there. Kurt Denny, Barbara Beeler, Johnny Wright. There's a good group of people. But yeah, he just said, go show up there, go meet people, go have coffee and mix and mingle. And so that's what I did.
Yeah. And what was that? Was that, I'm sure you were working, co-writing like a little bit or whatever, but was that like a pretty big shift having somebody, I don't know, just being involved with a company, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it felt, obviously positive. There was I was the freshman on campus, so I had to sneak in there and just kind of, meet people as I could. I had some great people who were willing to give me a shot. Susan Longacre was one of the first, she was having hits with Reba. Yeah. And she said, yeah, all right with you. Wow. Jeff Stevens, I brought Jeff Stevens a a piece of what became true, and that ended up being first number one song for George Strait, but my first number one. But Jeff gave me a shot, and I walked in with a piece of a chorus, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how long, just to go back a little bit, just to get some perspective, like,
Yeah.
so how long from when you moved to Nashville, like, I guess this was kind of your first publishing deal. I don't know what the actual thing was.
Yeah.
Was it, you said it was like a couple years, 3 years or something, or?
For what?
How, from when you moved to Nashville?
Oh, to get my deal?
Yeah.
It was 5 months.
5 months. Okay. So it was pretty quick.
Yeah. And that was just, you know, I feel like, you know, in a lot of ways I did my homework before I got here, you know, just playing in bars as long as I did. I was writing songs. I mean, in high school, I didn't really talk. I had a teacher who was nice and sweet enough to let me write lyrics instead of comp.
Wow.
So it was a composition class, and I said, is there any way I can write lyrics instead? And he goes, yeah, as long as you're productive. And so what a great teacher.
Yeah.
But I was writing songs since about 8th grade in some form or fashion. So, but yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for Scott hearing my music, I mean, there were other people already nipping, because I was hitting those, you know, and I know they have them all over town now, but back then there were a couple hot spots to go try to do writers' nights.
Yeah.
And I was hitting them as much as I could, and mixing and mingling, and, you know, meeting a few people who had become co-writers.
Yeah.
But yeah, 5 months, I did get a publishing deal.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you were ready.
I was ready.
You kind of had
ready to rock. Yeah.
You had done the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So I think that's like the most important part. I didn't move to Nashville till I was, I don't know, 26. And like, I'd never trade, even though it seemed pointless at the time. All the time I spent, you know, writing songs by myself and all that stuff, playing in bars. It was like, by the time I got here, I was ready.
You're ready.
Yeah.
And you got to be ready. You can't, you know, if you're not ready, then you're going to spend years, you know, just trying to figure it out, and, you know.
Yeah.
So either way, you're doing your time either at home, learning as much as you can from your home base, or you're going to move to Nashville. And I still believe, I think you're expressed, if you do get here, things are gonna happen faster if you're a hard worker.
Yep.
There's no town like this town to make things happen, and it's just an easy town to network in. It's such an easy town to meet people and figure out who your crew is pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's centralized. You know?
Yeah. Even as big as it keeps getting and continues to get, it still feels somewhat like a small town. And I still hear people say that, you know, that have just moved here, you know, which is cool. I hope it stays that way forever.
So tell me, there's a bunch of songs I'd love to talk to you about or ask you about, but you were talking earlier about your first number one. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that was like? And
well, and again, for George Strait to be my first number one is like a crazy dream. You know, I would have never guessed that one. You know? Again, my brother introduced me to George Strait through the first record. I mean, bringing that, we had a great little ranch house, and he would bring vinyl in that was, you know, whoever, Brooks and Dunn's first record, or George, you know, stuff that I might not have heard, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we did not write that song thinking of George Strait, which is, you know, always kind of a fun, you know, when you write something, you're like, wow, he did it. Because I think, you know, we pitched it to Ronnie and Kix first, and I think they liked it, but ended up not doing it, you know.
Yeah.
But that was just part. I love, I mean, if you look at my cuts, there's a lot of one-word titles. I think if you just look at a word, if you can just, it's an exercise to some degree, and it's a craft just to see what words and phrases you can put around the word. And true was one of those things. I was like, well, you know, it was kind of fun to start with the statement, true in this modern world, you know, and do like that, and true like the sun coming up in the morning. Just different ways to work with phrases that, you know, sounded good with true. And that was the beginning of that song. Obviously a love song. And Jeff was great. I mean, he brought a lot to it too, you know. Yeah. And he had already had some hits under his belt, so I trusted him.
Yeah. It's important. So so he cuts it, and then is it like immediately a hit, or
I don't think it was the first single. I'd have to look at the songs on that album, but it probably was like the second single. And it you know, I mean, it's George. I mean, I think he could do no wrong.
Right.
And he mostly on anything he's ever released has done no wrong. Yep. And yeah, it was just, yeah. And I had, there was an artist on Curb the year before. My first top 10 was on a guy named David Kirsch on Curb Records, a Texas guy. And so I actually had a number 9 song the year before. That was my first radio success.
Yeah.
In 1997.
And at that time too, I mean, CDs were still like
a
thing. I mean, I just remember stories of, you know, people telling me it's like it used to be, if you just got a song on the record, you could.
No doubt. So this is 97, 98, 99
Yeah.
is the beginning of where I started hitting. And you have to understand, so we are talking a world where it's all mechanicals. There's no digital yet. And it's also a time where if you're an artist and if you hadn't sold platinum, you're kind of considered a failure.
Wow.
And so, you know, it feels like now it's just you're aware of everything. There was a time in my career where I didn't even know who was cutting my songs. They're like, hey, do you know last week Diamond Rio and Brooks and Dunn cut one of your songs? I was like, no, that is amazing. And those are platinum artists. And so, you know, a lot of them were two ways. So you could make a good living back then on a what we call an album cut, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those days are
the gold rush. And I caught the end of it. I mean, you know, I could have certainly arrived here earlier and benefited, you know, from, I would say all through the 90s, you know, those guys, Tom Shapiro, Bob DePiro that were here. I mean, they just were on so many albums, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I don't know. It's like fun to think about, you know, the way it was. Now there's a way it is, you know, and I mean, it's fine.
We'll figure it out. And
Absolutely.
It's kind of the Wild West right now, but I feel like it's getting better slowly as far as how a songwriter gets paid on a non-single, a non-radio song.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's slowly getting better. But we're not in a good spot. When we negotiate, unfortunately, we negotiate with the fear of losing what we've gained, and that's not a good place to be.
Yeah.
When you go before a copyright judge, which is what we have to do, you go in there fearing that the tech companies can go in there and change a judge's mind and change the ground that we've gained, which is pennies on the dollar. So
yeah. Yes, it feels very obviously the negotiating itself feels like there's this massive power imbalance strictly from, you know, look, my wife is an attorney, and when you're, you know, doing something, who you have representing you, who you can afford.
Oh yeah,
makes a huge difference. And you know,
and Bart at NSAI has been such a great you know, help to us. But even hell, I mean, I've been on the phone. Let's get in there and change copyright law. And he's like, oh, Marv, that's almost impossible. I was like,
yeah. Act of Congress, really, literally is what it would take. So
but we'll see.
Yeah,
I'm hoping we can keep
things
going.
It feels, you know, it feels hopeful, and I, at the end of the day, right, the song, there's nothing without the song. So the song matters. It has
I think,
to.
yeah, and I think the great songs will rise above it all.
Yeah.
The good news is there, you know, as a songwriter, it's fun to see that it's an amazing time to be an artist.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a little old to be worried about that, but I can still have a dream to put out music that could catch fire somewhere in some fashion.
Absolutely.
As a singer-songwriter. And the singer-songwriter show thing has really picked up the last couple of years. I mean, I'm making a pretty good living just going out and doing these songwriter shows too. So
yeah. And what do you think that's like, because people are craving like real music and authenticity, or is that just like the weight of the hits that you have and people want to hear you do them, or? would you attribute
it's
it to?
exposure. I mean, it's every time I play a town I hadn't played or expose a songwriter show, and this is, very much like what you'd see at the Bluebird. It's 3, maybe 4 songwriters singing, telling the stories behind their songs, and the crowd just, whoever had not seen that before, once they see it, they're just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I mean, they love the stories, they love the anecdotes behind some of the songs, and they just eat it up. And when I do return shows, I do a benefit for Alzheimer's and dementia-assisted living out in California. And I mean, that's 700 seats. It sells out in 10 minutes, and those people every year just go crazy for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can do that and find areas that know what that is, then it's unstoppable. And I think part of it too is because of Nashville, we have a lot more, corporations coming in, having get-togethers here. A lot of times lately, it's been part of part of your night. You guys have been working hard on talking about work. Well, we're going to treat you to dinner and a songwriter show, and then they see that and they're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
so it's fun.
Yeah, they see. I don't know. There's nothing quite like watching around. It's so fun getting to show. People come in to visit, and they always ask me what they should do. I'm like, you should go to the Bluebird, the listening room, or whatever, and
absolutely,
and see it. And I think people fall in love with it.
And really, I mean, that's what brought me to this town. When I visited for a few days, I went to the Bluebird, and I went to Douglas Corner, and I went to Skull's Rainbow Room on down there, Printer's Alley. And man, when I saw that, I was like, I'm in. I'm so close to the song in this environment that why would I not want to try to be a part of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've been a part of so many great songs and so many of these songs that are kind of what got me into country music.
Oh.
So I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of them, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
And I think I've asked you about this before in the writer room, but I know you wrote "Creepin'" on the Chief record.
Yeah.
And I don't know how did that come about? It's such an interesting song and title. And
yeah. Well, I met Eric when he was working on the first record. I think my publisher just set me up with him. And, Eric he hadn't recorded a record yet. He was playing out, but trying to start to build what he's going to build. And we wrote something. It was okay. I have to find that work tape, and I've said this before. I just know it exists on mini discs somewhere. But I need to find it because my memory, if it's correct, it has kind of a Van Morrison kind of a vibe, which may suit maybe even what he's doing these days. But
yeah.
So we wrote for record 1. It didn't really go anywhere. And then I heard Smoke a Little Smoke, Drink a Little Drink. And when I heard that record off of the second record, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get back with Eric.
Yeah.
So I reached out. We wrote, we got together as the last time we wrote on Music Row. I've written a little with him since, but he just came in with this kind of spooky little part of a verse, and Eric's such a great writer. I mean, anytime I've been with him, he knows what he wants to do that day. It's like, a good songwriter is going to show up with a couple of things that he hopes and is planning on maybe the artist digging, but Eric just knows what he wants to do, and on that day he's like, man, I started this little verse out on the he used to have a screen porch at his previous house, and he started going in with like a honeybee beating on my screen door, and he had some of it, and then I think he even said, and on the back half of it's gonna go creeping, and I was like, it's weird as crap, but okay, let's go. And we wrote the tune on acoustic guitars, recorded it on whatever we had at the time to record on. And it was very kind of acousticy, grassy, Ozarky.
Yeah.
And that's the last I heard of it. And then the next thing I know, they're like, he's in the studio. Wait till you hear what they're doing to Creepin'. And I was like, what are they doing to Creepin'? So then I heard that record, and I was like, oh, my Lord, what a production. Eric and
Jay
Joyce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds, I mean, I'm you've kind of explained to me the work tape before, and I can't even picture it because the record is just like seared in my brain of how it is. But
I've got the work tape. I'll have to play it for you sometime.
Yeah, that's awesome. And did it? Does that? What? I don't know. Does it? I know you've been a part of so many big records. So like, does it ever? I don't know. Do you get used to it, like having songs on big records, or does it feel special every time?
I don't know. It's always a little surreal on some level. I mean, it's always amazing, and I always try to just stop and breathe in and just acknowledge that it happened. And it's always a celebration of some kind, but then you're always worried, like, okay, did it make the record? And then is it going to be a single? And then if it's a single, is it going to do good? And it's like there's so much worrying to get to success, you know? But yeah, all you can do is celebrate it when there's something to celebrate. And there was it was his first appearance at the Bridgestone. You know, he had gotten to the next level of playing those size rooms. And it was at the show he told me that it was going to be the next single, which I couldn't believe, but I still remember. Backstage he goes, "Hey, guess what the next single is?" And I said, what it's Creeping. I was like, amazing. Yeah,
that's awesome. What are some other high water marks along the way that you remember?
Well, Amazed, you know, we can talk about Amazed.
Yeah, we got to talk about Amazed.
You know, the fact that another one is, I was sitting with Leslie Satcher, who, you know, she had just got a Don Williams cut, and Don was at the Ryman, and we were in the audience, and she said, this is probably 2013 or so, 2014 maybe, and she goes, "Marv, if you could have a cut on anybody, who would it be?" And I was like, well, I love Don, and I really love Don, but if I could have a cut on anybody, it would be Merle Haggard or Willie Nelson. Fast forward about 6 months, I'm in a room with Sean Camp. Sean and I both had success with George Strait, so we're like, let's get on something for George.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, he goes, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to go play acoustic guitar for Willie and Merle. They're going to do another Poncho and Lefty kind of record." And I said, "Well, we have to write for that."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, no, I've been sending songs to Willie. It ain't going to happen. I mean, Willie turns me down." And I said, "Man, I got an idea." And I told him that idea, if I'd have known I was going to, it was actually a quote from an actor who said, "I'd have taken better care of myself if I'd have known I was going to live this long." And I always thought that was a great idea for a song. And we wrote it, and sure enough, they cut that thing. So I do have a Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard cut that's pretty high on my
that's amazing. When you said this is sort of a detour, but do you get a lot of your ideas, titles, and stuff? Do you just kind of keep your antenna up whenever you're watching?
Watching, reading, listening. Yeah, it's always on.
Yeah,
it's very rarely, even when I don't want it on, it's on. You know. And that's okay.
It's sort of a blessing and a curse.
I know. My wife's talking to me, and then suddenly she sees I'm fading from the conversation. I'm like, "I'll be back in a minute." Sorry, honey.
Yeah. Just we were watching. My wife and I were watching some TV show. It's like every other line was a title. I was like, "Listen, I'm sorry." She's like, "What are you doing on your phone?"
I mean, TV shows are so good because it's the English language. Like if you're not 100% in, but then you hear a phrase and you're like, "Oh my God, that phrase!" You know, that's not been written. I don't think that, you know, and your brain starts working. So
yeah,
it's beautiful. But that happens with books too.
Yeah,
it happens when you listen to someone else's song. You know.
Yeah, little line in there.
Little line. You're like, ooh, dang.
Well, talk to me about Amazed.
Yeah, so Amazed. I had just met Tasha, and Chris and Amy, Chris Lindsay, Amy Mayo were dear friends. Amy and I met. Well, we met about the same time, I guess, in different environments. And but Amy and Chris were starting to have a relationship, and Amy, you know, back then, this would have been 98, beginning in 98. And so back then, you had to book out the hot studios in town. And I know it's hard for track people to comprehend this, but But imagine this. So County Q was one of the studios, and it was so hot. And what makes a studio hot generally is great writers record there, and suddenly there's a vibe like, shit, there's a bunch of hits coming out of that studio, when really there's a bunch of songs that got cut there. But County Q was on fire, and it was a great crew over there. And so you had to book it out like a couple months in advance.
Okay.
The problem with that, especially if you're someone like Amy, I dearly love Amy, but she would have instances where she had 4 songs done and the session was the next day, and she's like, to make it budget happy, you have to have 5, cut 5 with a band, and anyway, so she needed one more. So she called me, and she had a session the next day, and she said, Marv, can you come over here? We got to write a love song tonight. And I was like, all right, I'm coming over. And then Chris was there too. And so, we went in because we knew we were, she knew Tasha totally had my number, and Amy and Chris were falling in love. So we were just vibing. We were just writing a love song, seeing, where it would go. And we did, and we didn't even know it was going to be called Amaze. We were aware of, McCartney had, Baby, I'm amazed by the way,
Yep.
And so we're like, what are we, amazed by you? And then finally, I think her publisher or Chris said, just call it Amaze. Just let it be one word. And we're like, okay. So we did. But I remember listening to the mix of our demo driving home, because back then you would cut in the morning, do vocals in the afternoon, do backgrounds that night, and then you'd mix the next day. Boom, boom, boom. And so after the mix, I was driving. We talked our buddy Bill Luther into singing it, who sang well, you can hear the demo. If you search Amazed on iTunes or Spotify, and you can find the demo, and you can actually hear what Lonestar heard. And Bill just sang it so soulfully, and just his voice still is great, but he just sold it,
Yeah.
And then Dan Huff heard it, and the rest is history. I mean, I thought when we turned it in, it was pretty progressive for where country was at the time.
Yeah.
Key changes and kind of a rock ballad, basically. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's I just remember like the first time I heard it. Obviously, it was like a while ago, and I was young, but
yeah,
it sticks with you.
He was 3.
No, a little older than that, but because I didn't grow up listening to a whole lot of country music, so there's just certain like songs like that, or then when my sister started driving, she used to drive me to school or whatever. She loved country music,
cool.
So that was like another time where it kind of like you
get exposed to something.
Yeah, and then I didn't like it because my sister liked it.
She liked it, yeah.
And I wanted to be cool and listen to my own thing, but
yeah.
It was great, and I should have known.
Yeah. And it was great. I mean, we won Academy of Country Music Song of the Year, and it took us to the Grammys.
Yeah.
So it was life-changing. Introduced me to some people I would not have met, people that wanted to write with me in the pop and rock world, which was kind of fun. But
do you enjoy doing that kind of writing in like other genres and?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I love the song. I mean, I think what sometimes makes it a genre is the instrumentation you put around it. I can make Amaze sound as country as you want, or it can sound as pop as you want.
Yeah.
I can make it just comes natural sound like a Tom Petty song pretty quickly. So it's just how you present it too sometimes. But yeah, I love it. I mean, I just worked with Pat Monahan from Train the other day, and I was always a fan, and it was fun to meet him. I work with Jewel, Bon Jovi, those kind of people,
Yeah.
It's been fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. There was one other song that I had in my mental list. It's not like I have any notes on me, but it was a Tim McGraw song. What am I blanking on that?
Shotgun Rider?
Yeah.
Or
it was Shotgun Rider.
He and Faith did Let's Make Love.
Yeah.
But the Shotgun Rider is still one of my favorites, and Tim still plays it live, which is cool.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Tim McGraw songs. There's just something about it, it's got that magic in it.
I think a lot, I got to give it up to Tim and Byron, though. Byron Gallimore and Tim, we that demo's halftime.
Really?
Those guys are the ones that turned it into a train beat. And they did a train beat in an interesting way. If you listen to sonically what's going on, it's kind of got a spookiness to it laid in there,
Yeah.
It's very much a love song. But, yeah, so imagine that. I mean, roll, won't you come roll with me? It had a halftime thing. I wrote it with Hillary, Lindsay, and Troy Burgess, and our demo's halftime.
Wow.
So Tim and Byron were the one who gave us the train beat.
Yeah.
But it's cool. And they recorded it well. And I think it's written well as far as a song,
Oh, absolutely.
Ironically, had no clue. This is sometimes, like, as a songwriter, you don't want to know too much, because Tim, and Strait has done this before, not with me, but Tim has another song called Shotgun Rider.
Really?
Yeah, and Faith sings on it. So, and I was fully unaware of it, and I even have, I think, a song on the album that the other Shotgun Rider's on, but just totally didn't know. And then I remember, like, sometimes when you know something's coming out soon, you hear rumblings of maybe they're playing it live. So I get out on Google and I Google Shotgun Rider, and the first thing I see is Shotgun Rider Tim with Faith Hill. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Faith is singing with Tim. And it turns out to be the previous Shotgun Rider that he recorded. And I'm like, wow. And yeah, same artist with two different songs that are same title.
Wow.
But Strait did that with Leave You with a Smile. He has two of those.
You're right. Sometimes it is better to not know.
It's better
because somebody would.
We would not have pitched, or no one would have pitched the song to Tim. He's already got a song called, or we'd have changed the title, which would have been terrible.
Yeah, yeah. You got to know. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, but I do love that song. I still play that usually whenever I play out too.
Yeah, that was another one that, like, I was kind of coming online with my country music listening at that time, but that one definitely broke through big time.
And Tim's been great. I've had more cuts on Tim than anybody. I think I've had 7 or 8 by now, including Let's Make Love. But
it's so obvious to me that you've had all of this success, and you clearly, like, love it.
Oh, yeah.
You love writing songs still. You have a passion for it, and that really shines through. Do you I don't know, like, what kind of, besides watching movies or reading books or whatever, like, what, this is sort of a weird question. It's not like what keeps you motivated, but what makes you excited still every day to get up and write a song?
I just love it. I don't know. I mean, it's beautiful because it's not work. It can feel like work, I guess, every now and then, but it's not. But I love to play. I love guitars, I love instruments. I love to chase a melody and see if the melody wants to say anything, but I love words, I love to just not have an instrument and just get a blank piece of paper and play with words. And I don't think I'll ever stop. You hear stories of some writers just stopping one day, and I don't think I'll ever stop. I don't know that I'll always do it at the pace I do it at, but I don't know. I love it. And I go to the beach and I walk along the ocean, and it's like, here comes a melody, it's like, just, I'm not wanting to write anything, but it just comes in,
Yeah.
It happens in my backyard. So, I just love it. I don't think I'll ever stop. And I love to play, and I love to sing, and I like to perform. So, and like I said, it's kind of the Wild West. There's no reason why next year I can't make an album and see if a song or two can land in a movie as me as the artist. So in fact, next year I want to spend more time
making a record and doing the thing.
Yeah, I don't really have a piece of work where I can just, I've got versions of me singing Amazed, and it just comes natural out there on the DSPs, but I don't have something that I can go, here, listen, this is me, which is crazy at my age. I don't have that, but it's a blessing and a curse with being a songwriter, is that you're creating usually for someone else at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I'm creating for me, don't get me wrong, but I hope to next year make something that I can say, Troy, check this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be awesome.
Yeah.
I would listen to it.
Oh.
But it'd be
I hope so.
pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I got one last question for you before you get out of here. If you could go back in time, give younger you some advice for the journey ahead, what would you say?
Well, I would just say, when you're 20, when you're 21, because I'm going to say, obviously, we got to get through high school.
Yeah.
Whether you go to college or not, that's up to you and your parents. For me, college was landing here, although I got to college late. It was landing here and getting in around writers who were better than me and writers who had hits. So there's that magical time where you don't have a lot weighing you down. You're free as a bird. Those are exciting times. So I'm going to say, if I could talk to 20 or 21-year-old, I would say just take care of yourself, worry about you. And I say take care of yourself in a healthy kind of way, but also in a work ethic kind of way, and focus on what you want to do. And let's say it is a writer and an artist or both. And then just focus on it and look at people who have come before you. And get around other people who play music too, It's such an exciting time. I mean, if I could go back, I would put a band together like that, because I know how to do it now. And I know, in fact, it's funny, the last time I played the Bluebird, there were some Belmont kids, and they were like, how do we do it? And I said, let's go have coffee soon. I'm going to, so it'll be fun, because now at least I can be a mentor,
Yeah.
And I'm doing it to my nephews. My older nephew, Carson, signed with Hardy recently as a writer, and I just signed my younger nephew at Sony as a 18-year-old songwriter. So wow. I'm gonna at least get to do it to the next generation on some level. But yeah, I would, if I was 21, if I could go, hey, here's what you do: you get yourself in a group of guys you believe in, you throw paint on the wall, baby, because in a rock and roll sense, and even in a country sense, just write what feels good, what sounds good, chase the melody, and just record, and then develop your following, and that's really more from a band sense. But I'm saying, like, now with all the information I have, I know how to do it. And yeah, I think that's one thing I would do. Now, if you're just looking at a writer, I would have to say, like we talked earlier, get a little of the homework done. Make sure you know what you're up against on some levels, what you love, what you want to write about. But then, the sooner you can get to a music center like Nashville, the better. You're going to grow faster on that level. Obviously, you got to get good at your instrument. So, unless you're just going to write lyric, you better be working on your guitar chops or piano chops. Or now, there's no reason why you can't work on your tracking chops. Because you can build it in a box. I don't think that's the great way to do it. I still think you should learn to play an instrument. But and then lyrically, study the poets, study writers, study songs, read. More stuff that's coming in, the more stuff's going to go out. So yeah, find novels that writers that you like to read. I'm a better writer when I'm reading, no doubt.
No, same.
So yeah, I mean, I guess, but I would, yeah. And I'm kind of on a mission. I'm going to try to, at least share some of what I've learned to the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have, I mean, you know a lot, you've done a lot, and it's very, very inspiring. And I'm very honored to have you here, and thank you for sharing. So
my pleasure.
Yeah.
Happy. I feel like it went by so fast.
Oh yeah,
a lot more to talk about, but that can be part 2.
Yeah, we'll do it again. Thanks again, and that's it. That's the pod. See you later. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. If you want to submit a question for one of our Q&A episodes, you can do so at tenuretowne.com. We would love it if you would join the Tenuretowne community, which just means we'll send you updates via email about stuff we got going on. And of course, please rate and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Wherever you listen or watch this thing, we appreciate you so much. See you next week.